Every time you go into an Anthropologie, it's gonna look and feel the same. There's probably gonna be some cool like denim art installation. There's gonna be similar music playing. There's going to be different displays of products, but everything flows together, right? Like even though they're updating their merchandise all the time, the experience is the same. That is how your brand should be. When people walk into your world, whether it's discovering Instagram posts, getting an email, seeing you on stage, they should all be cohesive. It is not by accident that I'm sitting on a green velvet couch with neutrals, wearing a kind of beige-ish jacket with silver on it. If you look at my Instagram or my website, you'll see those colors. This is not by mistake, y'all. Okay, everything is brand. And the more grown up your brand becomes, the more every single element becomes cohesive and tied together. So that is what I mean by creating a brand. And that is what your business is absolutely capable of. But it starts with figuring out your identity, your positioning, that foundation of that beautiful pyramid. So that's what I want to help you create. Welcome to Side Note, the podcast, where we explore the intersection of business and intuition. I'm your host, Samantha Fackler, a Fortune 100 marketing advisor turned leadership coach who has worked with over 100 companies across 13 years and counting. And yes, I also keep crystals on my desk. I love astrology, and I'm a trained Reiki master. So I see the connections that other people miss. Join me for conversations that'll change how you think about business, life, and everything in between. Welcome to the show. Today we are talking about what I learned from talking to 30 brand designers about rebranding success. And I want to just take you behind the curtain of all these conversations because I really started it out as just looking for my brand designer for my rebrand. And it turned into this really huge research project that I totally nerded out on. And I had a great time. I met some incredible people, some super talented designers, and I also learned a lot. And I don't think many people have interviewed 30 brand designers. I remember David was like, we approach this very differently. I would have probably interviewed two and then chosen one. But, I'm really happy I did. I ended up choosing my designer after probably the 20th. But I had other calls and I wanted to complete this research project alongside it. So let me take you behind the curtain. I interviewed 30 designers and I found that the number one most costly mistake was not actually the designer's fee. That's not actually the most expensive thing. The most expensive thing is this invisible cost of doing it wrong and actually not understanding your brand's identity or strategy before approaching a designer. Because there's so many ways that this can go poorly. And I've seen it with a lot of clients. Like they paid for a website and they spent all this money, $5,000, $7,000, and then realize a couple months later, oh my gosh, I need to redo it. So that's the most expensive part, is getting this thing wrong and looking for something that looks pretty, but not realizing what actually goes into it. So there were 2 or 3 specific things that I found in these conversations with designers. One is that they all approach strategy differently. So some might ask a few questions with a questionnaire. Other ones do like a 1-hour strategy workshop. No one does like an end-to-end strategy because they are focused on design. So they're like, okay, give me some key things and then I'll interpret from there. But what happens is that without a thorough strategy process to get this thing off the ground, it leaves a lot of holes later on. And what that looks like is, the client and the designer get frustrated because the website they put together actually doesn't look or feel anything like the client, had in their head, the vision that they had. Or the client said, I want a really playful brand with pinks and oranges. And then their definition of playful is completely different than the designer's definition of playful. One just thinks it's kind of like an experimental combination of elements, where another person thinks it's going to be bright colors and like organic shapes. So it's really hard, this is the second specific thing. It's really hard to communicate what you want in design and have that be heard on the other side. And I see this all the time as a coach because people are like, oh, I'm really struggling with this thing. And then I'm like, well, tell me what struggling looks like to you, right? It's that common classic question of like, oh, well, tell me what this actually means to you. And that provides so much information to me as a coach. And the same thing with design. It's like, okay, well, tell me what playful design means to you. Show me what playful looks like to you. So there are all these really important questions that don't happen. And then when they don't happen, it means lots of moolah going down the drain, which we don't like. The last one here, too, that I noticed after all these conversations is there's a lack of standardization when it comes to strategy. They all do it differently, and no one does it well. And I think it's this classic thing of when you want to offer a lot of different things so that you seem like this all-in-one approach, but actually you're not great at all the things. You're really great at probably one or two, but not all of them. So if you find a brand designer who also does copywriting and website development and design, I really caution you to look thoroughly at their portfolio, to maybe talk to past clients of theirs, because I've never seen someone do all those things well. A lot of times they're just going to be building something that's off a template, or maybe copywriting great, but like all the other stuff's not that great. And then you have a website that doesn't work quite well, or you have a lot of bugs and issues. Or you have a designer that's amazing, but actually they're not great at website development. And there's like a lot of wonky things that like aren't responsive or don't work well on your mobile. So look carefully, right? And to look carefully, that means you need to know what you're looking for. And I also see this too, is meeting with brand designers. A lot of them say like, oh, I can do so many different styles. Like I can do the simple, beige, minimalistic wellness brand feel. And I can do the playful, bright colors, funky things. I actually don't think that's true. This might be a hot take, but after meeting with 30 of them, I was like, no, all of you have your own style that you gravitate towards. And that's present in all of their portfolio work. So this is really important too, because a lot of people will start looking for designers based off of referrals or whoever pops up in their search. And they might actually not do the design that you need. They might specialize in this like bold black and white thing when you're actually looking for something that's like soft and colorful and maybe ethereal, right? There's so many different signature styles out there. You want to find someone who is really in the creative direction lane that you're looking for. But that means that you need to know what you're looking for, right? So again, it comes back to how do you know what to look for? So that's when we start talking about a hierarchy of brand needs. And you can think of it as like a beautiful temple or like a pyramid, right? And so you have this foundation at the bottom, and that's what gives everything stability. It's really what anchors your entire business. And this foundation part is your positioning and identity. And most people skip this part. They go straight to the top, and then they wonder why it all wobbles and falls down. Once you have this positioning and identity, then you move on to audience and messaging, because you're clear on what you do and who you are, but you're not clear on who's on the other end of things. And I like to view businesses as vehicles or channels. They deliver value between two things, right? You deliver something to customers and they deliver value in the form of money in exchange. It's always an energetic exchange, no matter what it is. Even if it's a trade or a barter situation, right? You're trading one thing for another. So that means you need to know your audience. You need to know who's on the other side of that channel. And a lot of people skip this part too. They keep it really general and they don't actually do any sort of research or discovery work, let's call it, to understand that. When you get your audience and positioning stuff down, so you have your identity and positioning, next level audience and messaging, that's when you start to become magnetic, because you have these fundamental pieces. On top of that is then the visual elements and applications. And this is your tone of voice. This is your colors, your palette, your logo, the animation, like how someone actually engages and scrolls, like all those little things on a website, how things appear, how words appear, how images appear, how they move. Websites are not just a mechanism to deliver some paragraphs to you. Like they are an experience. So your brand is reflected in all of those minor little things. And I think great brands leave little Easter eggs around. You can definitely find them. So the designer I decided to work with, we were talking about Easter eggs today, and her brand is playful. And her menu button actually, when you scroll on her website, it spins slowly like a Ferris wheel. Now, it doesn't look like a Ferris wheel. It actually kind of looks like a flower because it just goes with her aesthetic. But there is like a Ferris wheel looking element to it. And even though I wouldn't go to her website and think Ferris wheel, I do get that feeling when I use it of like, oh, it does give me this like kind of Ferris wheel amusement park feeling as I move through her site. So it's very, very cool what what can be done. I also worked on a rebrand for a company called Crunchbase. And they're a technology company, a lot of like information on who's getting funding and who is funding who in the tech space. And I worked with a designer on the rebrand, and the designer came from Reddit. So she had done Reddit's redesign. And then her and I worked closely, me, the strategist, her, the creative, on the Crunchbase rebrand. And together she made this like these beautiful illustrations with all this color, and it really made this company stand out because all the other companies looked like tech and data and like navy and white, like super boring. And we made Crunchbase so unique. And there were all these little Easter eggs of things, like all these things from the company culture she put in these beautiful illustrations. And she made this merch, like one of the t-shirts had like really cool, like creative things in there. And there are other Easter eggs that are like the identity of the designer or the strategist actually in the brand. So another example here is one of my best friends, Miranda. She's a designer, and she works for a company doing all sorts of brand design stuff. But she was designing something for, I think, like TwitchCon. And it was like the merchandise at this conference, right? So it's branded, it's like these awesome colors. Now, most people don't know this, but my friend Miranda used to work for Mountain Hardwear, which, if you aren't familiar, is kind of like an REI, Patagonia, like outdoor camping and hiking and outdoor equipment. Awesome brand. But because of that, like she's very attuned to like climbing things. And in this merchandise for TwitchCon, there was this little like carabiner thing with the backpack. And it was this element of like, oh my gosh, there's Miranda in the merchandise. Like that's a little piece of her that most people wouldn't know, but I know because I know her. So whoever you design, there are going to be elements of them in your brand too. And it might not be obvious like that, but it's really important that you choose the right person because it will impact your brand, whoever you choose. And I'll do a whole thing on this later. But when you find the right person, it's the most amazing feeling in the world. Like I met my new brand designer, and when after our call, I was like giddy and I had this intuitive, like, yes, like she is the person to help bring this to life. And I know a lot of brilliant other designers that definitely could have worked on the brand too, but it was just this magic of like, this person is supposed to help bring this into the world. So you will get there and you will find that person if that's what you're looking for. And I'll talk about that later. I think the magic of all of this is when it all comes together because it can all feel like a lot. I get that. You're like, I'm tired listening already. Like, how do we make this fun again? So let's bring it back to an analogy really quickly. And I call this the storefront analogy. Let's say you're walking down the street and you have I don't know, your favorite beverage in your hand and you're on the prowl. You're like, I'm in the mood to shop. And you walk down a street that you know quite well, and there are a couple storefronts and most of them haven't changed. And there's one you walk by, yeah, it's the same thing. You keep going, and then you walk by another and oh, something changed. The store was already there, but something's different here. And you take it in, and there's these like really cool mannequins and this display around them, and the colors go together. And you're like, oh, I'm going to check out what changed. So you walk in, and someone greets you and they say, oh, I'll take your beverage. Or maybe they deliver you a beverage of sorts. And you notice the music is playing, and that music kind of goes with the vibe. Like it feels like you kind of entered a world. And you continue, and like you find that you really want to like touch all these fabrics and look at all these things. And there are these like art displays that have these beautiful colors, and everything just goes together. and you're greeted, you find something you like, you go to the checkout counter and you're greeted in a really friendly way. And there's just this like friendly, joyous vibe about this whole place. And they give you a bag, and the bag is like a bright yellow and it goes with this whole brand. Just say all the elements are orchestrated, right? Like, oh, wow, thank you. And then you go, you leave, you go about your day. And that's an experience. Notice that you didn't go into any of the stores that you've seen before. Because let's now just pretend that you backtrack and you're like, oh, I'm in the mood. That was great. That's a good experience. So then you go into another store and the display is maybe like purple and they're like a lot of like boxy clothes. And you're like, okay, maybe let's try it. I don't know. Not a huge boxy fan, but let's see what's up. You go inside and then all of a sudden it's like yellow and green in different areas, but like a totally different tone and different textures, and every like round of clothes is like a different presentation with different styles. You're kind of like, I'm confused. And like at one moment, there's like a hip hop song. And then the next moment, there's like an acoustic guitar song. And then you go to the counter and someone answers, says hi, greets you, super friendly, like over the top enthusiastic. And you're like, okay, interesting. All right. And then they're like, oh, hold on. And then they go in the back and then someone else comes out and they're like super straightforward and direct and like very professional. And then they finish your transaction and then you leave. That's a very confusing experience. Those two experiences are wildly different. It's the difference between going to like an Apple, right? When you go to an Apple store, you know you're at an Apple store. Every single Apple store is the same. Every Genius Bar employee is going to have like a look, like a type of shirt or something that identifies them. Every time you go into an Anthropologie, it's going to look and feel the same. There's probably going to be some cool like denim art installation. There's going to be similar music playing. There's going to be different displays of products, but everything flows together, right? Like even though they're updating their merchandise all the time, the experience is the same. That is how your brand should be. When people walk into your world, whether it's discovering Instagram posts, getting an email, seeing you on stage, they should all be cohesive. It is not by accident that I'm sitting on a green velvet couch with neutrals, wearing a kind of beige-ish jacket with silver on it. If you look at my Instagram or my website, you'll see those colors. This is not by mistake, y'all. Okay? Everything is brand. And the more grown up your brand becomes, the more every single element becomes cohesive and tied together. So that is what I mean by creating a brand. And that is what your business is absolutely capable of. But it starts with figuring out your identity, your positioning, that foundation of that beautiful pyramid. So that's what I want to help you create, because I've seen a ton of clients struggle with this. And I really think the world just needs to know better strategy. We need a new standard. So on April 15th, I'm hosting a free workshop called How to Rebrand. And I'm going to be going over like, what does this pyramid look like? What are some key questions that you can actually answer in the workshop so you walk away with immediate value? This is not going to be a masterclass that's just like a lecture you tune out of. This is going to be really actionable. You're also going to get a roadmap so you understand how rebrands work from start to finish. What's a step-by-step approach? What are the elements that you can DIY versus invest, depending on how much budget you have? Also, designers. What are their actual pricing tiers? Because I've talked to 30 and I've probably looked at over 100 between January and March in this huge research project. So I will actually break it down for you of what to expect. And also the difference in quality. Because some designers are charging, 10K, 15K. Some are charging 1K. So what's the difference? And how do you actually vet these people so you make a wise decision? We're going to cover so many other things too, like psychological triggers that actually make you stand out. We're going to be talking about the non-negotiable things you need to answer before you meet with a designer. And we're going to have fun. Like this is going to be playful too. I have a lot of exercises that I created One is called Inspo Disco that I think all of you are gonna love. And we're gonna have a good time. It's gonna be like a little party, a little rebirth party. So we're also gonna do a little meditation during this to like ground and like have you really connect to your truth. So save your spot by heading to the link in the show notes. If you can't make it live, that's okay. A recording will be provided, but there will be limited live spots. So if you are coming, definitely show up promptly. Bring a pencil or pen, some writing utensils, because you're going to leave with so much juice that you can immediately bake into your brand. An example of this is that I recently worked with a client on some positioning work, and all she needed to do was just tweak a couple of her offers and some of her messaging on her site. Literally 2 days later, she had a new client when she was struggling for like months before. So this stuff is really, really, really impactful. April 15th, How to Rebrand workshop, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern time zone. Mark your calendars. I'll see you there.